The final installment ever of The Crown has recently been released, and following on from the end of Season 6 Part 1, it was always going to be difficult to live up to what occurred in the episode which was titled Aftermath, one of the best episodes that the show has actually produced. But with 6 more episodes making up Part 2 of Season 6, the show concluded in the year 2005, and I know what you're thinking, the Queen didn't die until 2022. But the show did find a way to incorporate the Queen's death and Prince Philip's death into the show too, albeit metaphorically. Not only with the closing 15 minutes, but also the final shot that we had. So I thought I'd explain the meaning of the final few moments in the show, discuss the importance, symbolism, and how it addressed the Queen's death. Here is how The Crown Season 6 Part 2 covered the Queen's death. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. During the final episode of the show, we saw that there was a large focus that was put on Operation London Bridge, which was the codename to alert the Prime Minister that the Queen had died. During the bringing up of this topic, for the remainder of the episode, the Queen was pretty much contemplating her place on the throne, thinking about death and also feeling quite useless. Obviously, being 18 years on from when this is based, we know that she went on to have a further 17 years on the throne. But it was something which set the mood and tone for the remainder of the episode. One which was heavily focused on death, so much so that during the final 15 minutes we saw a scene take place which could be interpreted as the Queen dying. After Charles and Camilla got married, we saw the Queen spending time with her family, where there was a photo taken, and the photographer said a quote from a Shakespearean play, which was "All's well that ends well, still the fine's the crown, whate'er the course, the end is the renown." Something which was essentially saying that things were and will be okay, and that the finish is all that matters. Despite the turbulent journey, how one finishes is what is important. From there we saw the Queen smile and almost realised that. After this, there were 2 heart balloons which went up into the air and were unretrievable. I think this was the first piece of symbolism of the Queen and Philip's deaths, and that the both of them were no longer around in the present day. 2 heart balloons representing their love for one another, floating off to an irretrievable place together. After this, we saw that the Queen entered the chapel on her own, and it was here where she was met with Philip. This is where we saw that Philip's death was first addressed. Whilst we didn't see Philip die on screen due to it being several years before it actually happened, we instead saw an intimate conversation occurring between himself and the Queen. He was speaking to her, and he said, "All human things are subject to decay, and when fate summons, even monarchs must obey." This was most definitely a reference to the fact that as we were watching the show, both the Queen and Philip were in fact dead. After he said this, we saw him give her one final kiss on the hand and say, "I'll leave you to it, say one for me." This was something that I think was symbolic of the fact that Prince Philip died 1 year before the Queen, and she was left on her own, hence why he wasn't in shot during the ending of the show, and why he left her to it, because that is what actually happened in reality. Prior to this happening, we also saw that the Queen mentioned how Philip wanted his coffin to be driven out in an old Land Rover, something which did actually happen in reality when he died in 2021. So I feel this was definitely a conversation and a moment that was paying homage to Prince Philip and acknowledging his death without him actually dying in the show, because that just wouldn't have been possible. After this happened and Philip left, the Queen turned around and then out of the blue, Sleep Dearie Sleep started playing, A Piper's Lament. This was a piece of music that was mentioned earlier on in the episode when she was speaking with the Sovereign Piper when she asked what piece of music he would recommend playing at her funeral. This was the actual piece of music that was played during the Queen's funeral. So the fact that we were hearing this being played as she was standing all alone in the chapel, it marked the beginning of her death in the show, and it was a reference to the fact that she was without her husband for the final year of her life. As she stepped down, within her own mind she saw her coffin present in the centre of St. George's Chapel, similarly to how her coffin was laid in reality, as it was within there where some of the funeral proceedings took place, with the crown laid on top of it along with her sceptre. As well as that, from there, a younger Elizabeth appeared from behind the coffin, where she gave the present-day Elizabeth a smile and a nod, accompanied with a salute, almost as if to say that it was time to go. From there, the Queen turned away, and on both of her sides, Olivia Colman's iteration of the Queen appeared on one side, and Claire Foy's iteration appeared on the other. The fact that the Queen was present in that room across all generations, it was almost done to be symbolic of the fact that her life was flashing before her eyes, and she was pretty much seeing everything laid out in front of her. As well as that, something to support the fact that this was marking the Queen's death was the selection that was done for Olivia Colman and Claire Foy's portrayal's outfits. They were both dressed in black and wearing the kind of attire that one would expect to be seeing somebody wearing to a funeral. So despite all of this taking place inside of the Queen's head and her looking back towards them, this was almost done as a way of showing that they were all there at once, the different stages of her life, and it was coming to an end. From there, once the camera turned around, we saw Elizabeth walk out of the entrance to the main section of the chapel, and there was this long, deliberate walk that she did to the main exit, a walk which we were made to watch the entirety of from a distance. At the end of this walk, we saw a bright light shining through the door. I interpreted this as the Queen walking into death, something that walking into the light is often symbolic of, departing into the afterlife. I think the long walk that she did, and the reason as to why it got a main focus, is representative of the fact that she went on to have another 17 years as head of the monarchy, something which in that moment of the show she didn't feel like she'd have. So the elongated walkway and stepping into the bright light behind the door is the long reign from 2005 and her eventual death in 2022. One thing that walking into the light could be symbolic of, if one doesn't want to presume that it was representing her death, it could be her stepping into the light, which is another 17 fruitful years as Queen, something that she never imagined that she'd have. But I personally feel it was done as a way of acknowledging the fact that the Queen was no longer here, and that within reality she was gone. So whilst the death of the Queen and Prince Philip didn't actually occur in the show in terms of a literal sense, like it did with Diana, Margaret and the Queen Mother, it instead went down the metaphorical and symbolic approach and hinted towards it happening in the future, something that it needed to do because the show chose to end in the year 2005. Whilst it's not 100% been confirmed if this is the case and that it was done for that specific reason, this is how I interpreted the closing moments of Season 6, the final part of the show, and I think it's a nice way to look at it. Some may just think that it's her looking at the plans that she made for her funeral and the fact that it eventually went on to be like that. So that is definitely one way that it could be interpreted, but I just feel like there's more to it than that, and there's a deeper meaning behind it. So, there you have it, how The Crown Season 6 Part 2 covered the Queen's death. If you want to see a full breakdown on Season 6 Part 1 and also Part 2, then click on the card in the top corner. I also compare it to the real life events, or alternatively you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. If you'd like to give me a show or movie that you'd like me to review, then head over to my Twitter, @BrainPilot_, and tweet me what show or movie you'd like me to review next. And finally, if you'd like to see what I rate the latest movies that don't quite make the cut to getting a dedicated video, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. Do you think they handled the Queen's death well? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.